When people speak of World War II, they speak of the Marines storming beaches, the soldiers taking towns, the airmen fighting in the skies, and the sailors battling in vast oceans. But behind every soldier, behind every ship, behind every bomber, there was one group of men who fought a different kind of war. A war without glory, without medals, without recognition. They were not enlisted. They were not celebrated. They were often forgotten. They were the United States Merchant Marine, a civilian force, unarmed, underpaid, and unprotected, yet essential, absolutely essential, to the survival of the Allied cause. Roosevelt once said, "The Merchant Marine delivered the goods when and where they were needed. Every man in this service should be proud." But history did not give them the credit they earned. This is the story of the men who crossed oceans filled with submarines, braved storms that shattered ships, carried cargoes that burned or exploded on impact, and kept Allied armies alive one voyage at a time. The invisible army of the sea. In 1939, when war erupted in Europe, the United States was still neutral, yet one branch of its national power was already deeply involved. Merchant ships carried everything the Allies needed: fuel, aircraft, tanks, ammunition, food rations, medical supplies, clothing, spare parts, steel and machinery, entire disassembled factories, locomotives and rail cars. Anything the Allies used in the field had to cross an ocean first, and the men who moved those supplies were civilians in their teens and 20s, many with no formal military training, but with a bravery born of necessity. They sailed into danger, without the weapons to defend themselves, without the armor to protect their ships, and with the knowledge that, if they were sunk, their chances of survival were slim. Yet the first to face the U-boats. Before America officially entered the war, the Merchant Marine was already fighting. The first Americans to die in World War II were merchant sailors, killed by German submarines in 1940 and 1941. They carried supplies to Britain under the Lend-Lease program. They sailed unarmed, under strict neutrality rules, with no escorts. German U-boats began targeting them anyway. The Merchant Marine became the first battlefield of America's war, and the men on these ships, many barely old enough to vote, faced torpedoes, deck gunfire, and the deadly cold of the North Atlantic long before Pearl Harbor. They fought alone, they died alone, and very few people noticed. America enters the war, and the danger grows. After Pearl Harbor, everything changed for everyone except the Merchant Marine. Their ships still had thin hulls. Their defenses still consisted of a few deck guns. Their routes still took them straight into U-boat hunting grounds. And now they carried more dangerous cargoes: aviation fuel, explosives, ammunition, tanks and artillery, gasoline in 50-gallon drums, torpedoes, depth charges. A single hit could turn a Liberty ship into a floating bomb, and every voyage crossed oceans that had become graveyards. But the Liberty ships, the workhorses built to be expendable. The United States began producing Liberty ships faster than the Germans could sink them. Crude by design, boxy and slow, built from cheap welded steel, Liberty ships were never meant to last. They were meant to get supplies across the ocean once, twice, maybe 10 times if luck held. The Merchant Marine manned them all. Some of these ships cracked in half in cold waters. Some sank without warning. Some never made it out of port because U-boats attacked so close to the American coastline that their flames could be seen from the beaches of Florida. The sailors knew the risks, yet they kept sailing. The most dangerous job of the war. Statistically, serving in the U.S. Merchant Marine during World War II was the most dangerous job held by any Americans. Their casualty rate was higher than the Army, higher than the Navy, higher than the Marines, and higher than the Air Corps. 1 out of every 26 merchant sailors died in the war. Higher than infantry battalions in Normandy. Higher than Marine divisions on Iwo Jima. Higher than bomber groups over Germany. They died by torpedo hits, burning oil, explosions, hypothermia, drowning, exposure while drifting in lifeboats. And when they returned home, they returned to silence. No parades, no medals, no benefits, not even veteran status. They were civilians again, until the next voyage. The forgotten battlefield, the North Atlantic. No battlefield in World War II was as constant, as unforgiving, or as deadly as the North Atlantic. The ocean itself was an enemy. Waves 50 feet high, freezing spray that turned decks to ice, storms that tore steel plates apart, winds that toppled cargo and men alike. And beneath those waves were the U-boats, silent, patient, waiting for their perfect moment to strike. Convoys stretched across the horizon, escorted by destroyers and corvettes. But the merchant marine remained the primary target. Every sailor knew that a torpedo strike could kill hundreds in a single instant. Yet, they kept sailing forward, voyage after voyage. Because without them, Britain would starve, Russia would collapse, and the Allied armies would grind to a halt. Are the men who made the miracle possible. Most merchant sailors were not warriors. They were fishermen, farmers' sons, longshoremen, machinists, teenagers seeking adventure, immigrants chasing a new life, men who loved the sea. But in wartime, their ships became lifelines. Every battle, El Alamein, Stalingrad, Normandy, Midway, relied on the supplies these civilians carried. They were not trained for combat, but they fought when they had to. They were not soldiers, but they became soldiers out of necessity. They were the quiet heroes, the ones history forgot to honor. The worst moments came at night. For the men of the U.S. Merchant Marine, the most terrifying sound in the world was silence. Silence meant the U-boat had not yet attacked, but it also meant it could be anywhere. On the darkest nights of the war, convoys moved through the Atlantic with their lights off, their radios silent, their engines thundering at a slow, steady beat as they pushed into the void. A merchant sailor once described it, "You didn't see the torpedo. You didn't hear the submarine. You only heard the explosion that meant it was already too late." This was the daily reality for tens of thousands of civilian sailors who never asked to fight a war, but fought it anyway. The first attack, a fireball in the night. The classic U-boat attack began the same way. A flash, a deafening crack, a column of water and flame, then chaos. A torpedo striking a Liberty ship didn't simply punch a hole. It ignited everything around it. Gasoline drums, aviation fuel, ammunition crates, explosives, rubber and oil, even food cargoes that burned hot and fast. A single hit could turn the entire ship into a fireball. Steel plates ripped apart, decks bent, bulkheads collapsed, boilers detonated. Cargo flew into the air like shrapnel. Men on watch were often thrown overboard before they even understood what had happened. Many ships never slowed down, they simply disappeared into fire. Survival was a miracle, not a plan. If you survived the blast, your next enemy was the sea. Cold, black, merciless. In the North Atlantic, water temperatures often sat near freezing. A man without a life raft could lose consciousness in minutes and die in less than half an hour. Merchant sailors knew this. They sailed anyway. Survival required reaching a raft, avoiding burning oil, escaping suction as the ship sank, finding other survivors, avoiding U-boat gunfire, staying alive until rescue arrived. Sometimes rescue never came. The ocean is large, convoys couldn't stop, escorts chased submarines, survivors drifted alone. The Merchant Marine lost more men, percentage-wise, than any other American branch because so many simply vanished into the sea with no one to witness their deaths. Convoy life, the grind of endless danger. When they weren't dying, They were working. Life aboard a Liberty ship was brutally hard. Merchant sailors stood watches through wind and freezing spray, scrubbing ice from the deck so the ship wouldn't capsize. In the galley, cooks prepared meals in storms that tossed pots across the room and sent boiling water shooting in every direction. Engineers worked in deafening heat next to machinery that could crush a man instantly if he slipped. Radio operators sat in cramped rooms listening for distress calls or coded warnings. Gunners, many, trained in a hurry, slept in their clothes and fired at periscopes or shadows, and all of them slept lightly, knowing a torpedo would give them only seconds to get out. One sailor wrote, "You went to sleep every night expecting to wake up in the water." Deck gunners, the only defense against U-boats. Merchant ships were not warships, but after 1942, they carried armed guard detachments, U.S. Navy personnel assigned to operate. 3-inch deck guns, 5-inch stern guns, 20mm Oerlikon cannons, machine guns, smoke generators. These weapons were the only thing standing between merchant sailors and a German submarine surfacing at dawn to finish the kill with gunfire. Often the battle was uneven. A U-boat surfaced 1,000 yards away and opened fire first. Still, the merchant crews fought. They had to. They were fighting for their lives. One gunner wrote in his diary, "We didn't fire for glory. We fired so we wouldn't burn." Some Liberty ships, despite being hopelessly outgunned, actually fought off submarine attacks. Others bought the convoy precious minutes, long enough for escorts to return and force the U-boats down. But most died anonymously in the open ocean. Or the hell of the Murmansk runs. If the North Atlantic was deadly, the Murmansk route carrying supplies to the Soviet Union was worse. Men called it the suicide run, Death Alley, the ice road of the sea. Temperatures plunged to 40-degree Fahrenheit. Ice froze onto ships so quickly that crews had to chip it off, or the vessel would become top-heavy and capsize. German aircraft attacked from Norway. U-boats prowled the route. Surface raiders threatened at night. Convoys PQ-17 and PQ-18 became infamous for their losses. Entire lines of ships burning or sinking in waters so cold survivors died before help reached them. Merchant sailors volunteered anyway. They understood the stakes. The Soviet Union depended on Allied supplies to stay alive. The men of the Merchant Marine risked death again and again to deliver those supplies to Arkhangelsk and Murmansk. Stalin later acknowledged, "Without American ships and the bravery of their crews, we would not have won the war." That became the Pacific War, a different kind of danger. In the Pacific, merchant marine crews faced new threats: Japanese submarines, surface raiders, aircraft from island bases, long-range bombers, kamikaze attacks, mines, coral reefs. Extreme heat ships carried marines and soldiers toward island assaults. They unloaded supplies under fire. They sometimes arrived at beaches only hours after combat began. At Guadalcanal, merchant sailors unloaded cargo at night on barely secure beaches, working in darkness to avoid air attacks. In the Philippines, Japanese aircraft targeted them relentlessly. In the later stages of the war, kamikaze strikes against merchant ships became increasingly common. And yet, the sailors pressed on. Because without cargo, no island could be taken. No beachhead could be held. No advance could continue. The campaign for survival: Liberty ships versus U-boat wolfpacks. By late 1942 and early 1943, German wolfpacks hunted convoys with deadly coordination. They attacked at night on the surface from multiple directions. Merchant sailors described it as hell breaking open. Dozens of U-boats could converge on a single convoy. Each Liberty ship was a slow-moving target. Fire spread from one ship to another. Explosions lit the sky. Oil coated the water. Screams echoed across the waves, and still, the convoy formation had to hold. If it scattered, the U-boats would pick off the survivors one by one. A merchant captain once said, "Your instinct is to run, but you must stay, because if you run, you die alone." The discipline of these civilian crews saved countless lives. The turning of the tide, but not for the merchant marine. In mid-1943, Allied escorts, aircraft, radar, sonar, and breaking the Enigma code began to turn the tide in the Atlantic. U-boat losses surged. Convoys became safer. The German wolfpack strategy collapsed. But for the merchant marine, nothing truly changed. Even in late 1944 and 1945, ships still hit mines, kamikazes, targeted transport ships, torpedoes still struck. The Arctic routes remained deadly. Pacific convoys faced brutal air attacks. Merchant sailors were still dying in large numbers, long after the Battle of the Atlantic was won. They fought to deliver the last cargoes that supported the final push into Germany and supplied the invasion of Okinawa. Their war did not get easier, not until the very last day. The bitter truth. No recognition, even as they died. While soldiers earned campaign medals and sailors received battle ribbons, merchant marine deaths often went unrecorded. Many families never learned exactly where or how their sons died. Their records were incomplete. Their service was unacknowledged. Their sacrifice was unrecognized. It would take 40 years before the United States finally granted them veteran status. 40 years. For the most dangerous service in all of World War II. We sailed because someone had to. Behind every ton of cargo carried across the oceans, behind every Liberty ship launched from an American shipyard, was a human story. Thousands of them. Stories of young men who signed up for adventure but found themselves trapped in burning seas. Stories of old sailors who had spent their lives on the water and now faced a war they never expected. Stories of immigrants who joined the merchant marine to prove their loyalty to the country that had given them a home. Stories of families who waited months for news that never came. The merchant marine was not a branch of the military. It was a workforce, a diverse, chaotic, deeply human mix of personalities, backgrounds, and dreams. And they all sailed together into the deadliest waters on Earth. None of the stories that should be remembered. Many merchant sailors left no records, no memoirs, no documentaries, no historian to tell their tale. But a few stories survived, enough to show the magnitude of what these men endured. The ship that refused to sink, SS Stephen Hopkins. In September 1942, a Liberty ship named Stephen Hopkins encountered a heavily armed German raider and its supply ship in the South Atlantic. Hopkins had one 4-inch gun, slow speed, a small crew, no armor. The German raider had 6-inch guns, faster speed, thick armor, trained naval crew. By every measure, Hopkins was doomed. But the merchant sailors fought back. They fired every shell they had. They kept the guns manned even as fire swept the deck. They hit the German raider so many times that it began to burn uncontrollably. Hopkins sank, but the German raider sank with it. A Liberty ship, manned by civilians, destroyed a warship in a duel to the death. Only 15 survivors lived to tell the story. The man who stayed at his post, Cadet Edwin O'Hara. During the Battle of the Stephen Hopkins, ammunition ran out and nearly every gunner was dead or wounded. A 19-year-old cadet, Edwin O'Hara, stood alone beside the gun as flames surrounded him. He loaded the last 5 shells by himself and fired all 5. Those final shots crippled the German raider's steering and sealed its fate. O'Hara died with his ship. He received the Merchant Marine Distinguished Service Medal, one of the highest honors a civilian can receive. Few outside the Merchant Marine have ever heard his name. The mystery of convoy. PQ-17. When convoy PQ-17 was ordered to scatter due to fears of German battleships, merchant ships broke formation and sailed alone into deadly waters. 24 ships were sunk. Some crews drifted for days in the Arctic Sea. Some froze to death moments after entering the water. Some lifeboats vanished and were never found. One ship, SS Winston-Salem, was torpedoed and broke apart. Survivors clung to floating debris as the temperature dropped to lethal levels. Of the 8 men who reached a lifeboat, only 2 survived the 9-day ordeal before rescue. These were civilians fighting battles normally known only to soldiers. In the captain, who went down with his ship, SS Henry Bacon. In February 1945, the Liberty ship Henry Bacon was evacuating Norwegian civilians from northern Norway when a squadron of German torpedo bombers attacked. Outnumbered and outgunned, the merchant marine crew fought back with anti-aircraft guns. They shot down several aircraft, one of the few times a Liberty ship repelled an air attack, but the ship was hit. As it began to sink, the captain ordered the lifeboats lowered and refused to enter one himself. He went down with the ship. His name was Albert Ramsay. He received almost no public recognition. Yet, the Norwegian survivors never forgot him. The sacrifice of black merchant seamen. The U.S. Merchant Marine included a significant number of African American sailors, one of the few services where black and white crew members served and bunked together. These men faced discrimination at home, low pay, dangerous duty assignments, little recognition. But they served with distinction. Many became top-rated seamen, cooks, and engineers. Some died in action. Some performed heroically during U-boat attacks. Yet after the war, they returned to a country that denied them veteran status for decades. Their stories are part of the merchant marine legacy that history nearly erased. The Merchant Marine Academy, a school of wartime funerals. The U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point was the only American service academy authorized to fly a Gold Star flag for each cadet killed in wartime. During World War II, 142 cadets died in action, more than all other service academies combined. They were teenagers, trained to run the engine rooms and bridges of Liberty and Victory ships. They learned navigation by stars and compass, then practiced it in blackout conditions on freezing decks. Some cadets died on their very first voyage. Others died rescuing crew members from burning ships. Kings Point is still the only academy with a national cemetery on its grounds, because for decades, no one else would bury merchant marine dead with military honors. When the ghost ships, wrecks that mark the seafloor. Across the Atlantic, in the Arctic, in the Indian Ocean, and in the Pacific, the remains of merchant marine vessels still rust silently on the seabed. Thousands of sailors lie with them. Many families never knew where their sons died. Some did not know they were dead until months later. Some never learned at all. Convoy HX-72, Convoy SC-7, Convoy PQ-13, Convoy ON-154, Convoy MW-12, Convoy TA-5, Convoy UGS-40, Convoy ONS-5. Each name marks a chapter of terror and endurance, and behind each chapter were merchant sailors who carried the war on their shoulders. The tragic irony, the merchant marines saved the war, and the Allies forgot them. During the war, Allied commanders understood the truth. No fuel, no bombers. No ammunition, no infantry. No food, no Britain. No trucks, no Red Army. No tanks, no invasion. No ships, no victory. The merchant marine provided all of it. Yet after the war, they received no GI Bill, no veteran health care, no retirement benefits, no national honors. Some spent decades trying to prove that they had served in wartime. Some died before recognition came. Their story is the most forgotten chapter of the Allied victory. The war ended. Our battle did not. When World War II finally ended in 1945, the world celebrated the soldiers who stormed the beaches, the sailors who fought the great naval battles, and the airmen who flew into fire. But for the merchant marine, the end of the war did not bring celebration. It brought silence. Total, suffocating silence. They came home without uniforms, without medals, without benefits, without parades, without recognition. For many, it felt as if their entire war had been erased. One sailor recalled, We sailed through hell, but when we came home, it was like we had never existed. The war was over, but their fight for dignity was just beginning. Why they were forgotten. Several forces combined to push the merchant marine into obscurity. 1. They were civilians, not enlisted military personnel. 2. Their missions were classified so families rarely learned what happened. 3. Many died at sea with no bodies recovered, no graves, no funerals. 4. Wartime secrecy hid convoy losses for years. 5. After the war, political disputes blocked benefits. 6. Their heroism embarrassed some officials who didn't want to admit that civilians bore the highest casualty rate of any American service. For decades, their service remained unrecognized in every textbook, every memorial, every government benefits program. But their importance was impossible to erase completely. Churchill's tribute, and the truth he could not speak publicly. Winston Churchill once wrote privately, "The merchant navy, with us since the beginning, suffer the hardest conditions and receive the least acknowledgement of any service." He knew their sacrifices. He knew Britain would have starved without them. He knew the Battle of the Atlantic was won on the backs of merchant sailors. But even Churchill could not publicly champion their cause in the way they deserved. They remained the shadows of the war, but the shadows held up the entire Allied world. The ships that fed the world after the war. When peace returned, the merchant marine did not stop. They carried relief food to starving Europe, displaced people to new homes, supplies to rebuild cities, machinery to restart factories, coal to heat the winter, medicine to stop epidemics, equipment for reconstruction, even animals to repopulate farms. The war had ended, but their mission continued. They helped feed Germany and Japan after the defeat. They helped rebuild Italy and France. They helped supply the Marshall Plan, named fittingly after George C. Marshall, another man who understood logistics better than anyone alive. Merchant sailors helped restore the world they had almost died saving. The long fight for justice. It took 40 years for the United States to grant merchant marine sailors veteran status. 4 decades. Most of the men who survived torpedoes, fires, and Arctic storms never lived to see that recognition. Finally, in 1988, Congress acknowledged their service. Too late for many, but not too late for history. Some of the remaining sailors wept when they received their certificates. One said, "I didn't want money, I didn't want medals. I just wanted someone to say that what we did mattered. It mattered more than most people knew." The Real Cost of Victory and the Real Heroes. By the end of Watin, sucked 1 in 26. Merchant marine sailors had died, the worst casualty rate of any American service. 733 ships had been sunk. Tens of thousands had endured fire, storms, and starvation. Thousands more had survived horrors they would rarely speak of again. But because of them, Britain survived. Russia stayed in the fight. North Africa was supplied. Italy was invaded. D-Day became possible. The Pacific Island campaigns continued. The world's armies stayed fed, fueled, and armed. Victory was built on steel hulls, stacked cargo, and the courage of men whose names history never learned. The merchant marine was the lifeline of the Allied world, and its sailors were the invisible heroes of the greatest war ever fought. The legacy they left behind today: Liberty ships sit as rusting artifacts in ship graveyards. Convoy maps gather dust in old naval archives. Few monuments mention the men who kept those lines open. But their legacy lives everywhere. In every soldier who reached Normandy, in every tank that rolled into Germany, in every bomber fueled for takeoff, in every meal eaten by Allied troops, in every liberated city, in every battle where supplies meant the difference between victory and defeat. The merchant marine did not win glory. They won the war. and it is long past time the world remembered them. Final word: the heroes who deserved more. One historian wrote, "The merchant marine did not wear uniforms, but they carried the war on their backs." This documentary is dedicated to the men who sailed into danger with no promise of recognition, no guarantee of survival, and no reward except the quiet knowledge that they were doing what the world desperately needed. They are not unknown, not anymore.